Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 9 of Mix It Up with ML, a podcast all about just learning, connecting, and really the human experience. And today, I'm super stoked to have somebody who, honestly, I've really been inspired by ever since being a practice player for the Princeton University women's basketball team. And that's Bella Alarie. So thanks for joining us at 11 p.m. in Spain. Bella, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so excited.
Great. So honestly, I usually have the guests kind of talk about how we met, but I basically just said we met through being practice player on the women's team.
Yeah.
So that was super dope. And I remember just being like, man, I knew your team was serious, but being out there, Bella was cooking me. I remember just being like, oh God, I'm out of my depth. But that was a great time, right? I remember that.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. I feel like the practice players that came and played with our team were honestly all the best. Like you, I remember Jeb and Nick.
Yes.
It makes the biggest difference, like having like competitive and actually like super talented guys like compete against us, and definitely prepared us to win a bunch of championships. So we're grateful for you guys.
Well, thank you. I hope, to hear that I played a small role in your dominance is pretty cool. So great. I figure we can jump right into it, Bella, make the best use of your time here. And so, as I mentioned, you've inspired me. So I imagine you've inspired so many, young ballers out there and anybody playing other sports as well. So with that in mind, I kind of just wanted to ask about your early life and your relationship with the game early on, right? And so
Yeah.
I know myself and like so many kids out there like want to go professional in sports. I remember oh, I told my mom and dad I want to be in the NBA and the MLB. And like that, nobody's ever done that, but like that's how we're dreaming, right?
Yeah.
So my question for you is was it always on your mind to reach the heights you've reached? And for the listeners, I didn't even say, Bella is, if you don't know, she's on the Dallas Wings in the WNBA. And so was that always on your mind to make the WNBA?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. So growing up, my dad played at Duke, and obviously that's like a crazy basketball culture. He was obsessed with Duke even years and years after he played there. And the most basketball I watched was like men's college basketball on TV because that's what was always playing in my house. And for a really long time, like I thought the ultimate goal was like I was going to play at Duke, just like my
Okay.
dad. And that was like the ultimate like peak of my like basketball like career. Like that was going to be it. And I think with women's professional sports, I've seen just over the course of my life, the visibility of it, like it increased a lot. But when I was younger, you couldn't really turn on the TV and just see like WNBA games like on all the
Right.
time. And I'm really happy that there's more visibility now. And I do think it still needs to get better, obviously. But, you know, I was able to go to a Mystics game when I was younger and like start to be inspired by these like professional female athletes. And so that's when I like kind of started to fall in love with the idea of playing professionally. I didn't really know it was a possibility though until I was like a freshman in college. Like I
Wow.
chose Princeton because I was like, I'll get the best of both worlds. Like I'll get to play basketball, but I'll get a degree and like work a more like normal job after college. And I just had a great experience at Princeton, was able to be developed so much as a player that that dream became more of a reality once my coach kind of told me after my freshman year. So that's kind of like how it started for me.
Right. And
Yeah.
I think that's really cool for people to hear, right? Who might be, trying to be inspired by you, just like you were by the Mystics when you went to the
Yeah.
game, that, you didn't necessarily think that you would be doing this, your whole life. So it's really cool to hear that from somebody like you. And I guess my next question would be, was there like a huge mental shift, or was it more subtle? Like once you realize like, okay, maybe I can do this. Did that have any impact on sort of how you approach the game? Or did you try not to think about, what was beyond Princeton while you were there?
It was definitely a big mental shift for me. Like I said, I went to Princeton because it's not really like a place that just cranks out WNBA players. Like it's people who succeed and do incredible things in the world, but it's not, you go to a Power 5 school if you're dreaming of the WNBA.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I had a great, rookie year. And then I was invited to try out for a US like national team, the under 19 team. And I made the team and got to compete with, the best at my age group for the summer. And that was like a huge like moment for me where it kind of clicked that I was like among these really good players at my age and that I could actually hang with them. And I sat down with my coach before my sophomore year, and she was like, WNBA is like pretty interested in you as a prospect.
Wow.
Like, I know you're young and like you might not be thinking about this, but if this is something you want, like I'll help like develop you to get there. We'll get you stronger, like we'll get you like the skills you need. And if that's something you want, like let's do it. And
Wow.
that was when I could like make that mental shift and like have the confidence and like understanding that that was a possibility.
Wow. And I think the other cool part of that, right, is what you mentioned. You always wanted to go to Duke, which is, in the Power Five, right? ACC.
Yeah.
And is there a potential maybe that you wouldn't have gotten the kind of playing time that you did early on at Princeton to sort of develop that confidence? So would you say that's true or not really true?
Yeah, absolutely. I think about it a lot. Like if not that UConn was recruiting me, but let's say I went there, like I don't know if I would have gotten the minutes or the confidence and like kind of been thrown in the ringer like as a freshman, like with a big like responsibility. That was like super valuable to me. Like I really needed that to develop as a player. So I think like playing at Princeton for Coach Banghart and then Coach Berube my senior year was like the best decision I could have made for sure.
And I think what that brings up, and I didn't play in college, but I just played club and I played at a high level in high school. So I have some familiarity sort of with this world. And I think it makes me think about the importance of timing in sort of your development, right? So like you're in the WNBA now and you didn't go to a Power Five conference school. So by that account, you could be considered like a late bloomer in some senses, right? Yeah. And I think we were talking about maybe before the pod started, just about the importance of surrounding yourself with great talent. And that's great at some stages, but then also you kind of, not that Princeton wasn't talented, but just you want to be in an environment where you can feel like you can grow your confidence first. So I think that's an important thing maybe to think about for any young hoopers out there who are like trying to, advance their game and their trajectory. Think about what environment you're putting yourself in.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's all about fit too. Like,
yes,
I visited a ton of schools, talked to a ton of coaches, and like Princeton, like it sounds so cheesy, but like I actually had a gut feeling. I was like, I need to be here. Like there's something about this place. And I think a lot of people like feel that way when they visit the right school. And it ended up working out for me. Like I enjoyed my 4 years like tremendously. And, but yeah, it's definitely about timing. And it's like, everyone's story is different. Like we all know like Steph Curry, like he was an underdog and definitely like a late bloomer. And look at him now, like literally having like, I think the best 3-point shooting like month in the
83
NBA.
threes in 1 month, like
insane. Like, but everyone's story can be different. And it's just about like what's best for you,
Absolutely. And so a little bit more on your early journey. Your dad went to Duke, played at Duke, and then played in the NBA, right? So this guy, he's a baller. He achieved at a very high level in the basketball sphere, right? And so one of my questions when I was thinking about your story is, was that ever, difficult at one point in your journey to like your relationship with your dad? And that's normal, but maybe you didn't have any difficulties, but I'd love to hear about, what that dynamic was like. And I'm sure it's a huge benefit, right? But also maybe tough at some points.
Yeah, no, it's so funny because we joke about it now, but I literally would cry in the car all the time. Like I hated like anytime my dad would give me like any constructive criticism, I was always just took it to heart. Like I just hated it. And he was my coach starting as a kindergartner. Like he always volunteered to be the rec coach, and the other parents loved it because obviously he knew what he was talking about. But he literally coached me like kindergarten through 6th grade. And around that age is when I like really started to like push back at him. And I was like having a hard time like balancing like the father-daughter relationship and the coach-player relationship. Like we couldn't always keep those separate. And so around like 7th grade, I joined another AAU team, and he was still like an assistant coach and like helped out a lot. But having like an actual head coach who wasn't my dad, who could bring a new perspective and could push me in a different way, was like really helpful to me. But yeah, honestly, he's like so knowledgeable of the sport, like has great advice, obviously played at the highest level. And so I always know I can rely on him for advice. And throughout my college career and this past year, he's been like so helpful and supportive. And we've definitely like figured out that father-daughter, and then like, here's some advice that might help you, how to keep those, civil and everything. So
Yeah.
it's definitely been a journey, because I know there's a lot of kids out there who like don't want to listen to their parents like
Yes.
comment on their sports because whatever, like we don't want to hear it, or I don't know what the reasons are. But once I, started to listen to him, it actually really helped me. So
Kudos to you guys. And it's definitely not easy. Cause it just feels personal sometimes. And my parents didn't play at the highest level, but sometimes my mom, I'd hear her on the film, just like, that was awful. She'd say it on the film and I'd listen to it. I'd be like, oh God. Like, and so, but also they actually, one time they were like, listen, we're not coming to your games anymore if you don't play harder. They actually like said that to me one time.
Really?
And that's the type of feedback, it's a give and a take, and it can be tough, but you can always reach that balance point, hopefully, for any young kids out there who are listening. And then last question, just sort of about the youth aspect. Do you have any advice beyond what we just talked about to any young girls specifically out there who are, dreaming about, playing college ball, or maybe even the WNBA? Any advice to them?
Yeah, I think the best advice I can give is, like, my journey is like unique to myself. And I was definitely a late bloomer and like struggled a lot with just my self-confidence as a basketball player. And I did not really find that confidence until I got to college and started to like understand my game and like what I could bring, and what made me like a special and unique player. And I think the best thing is to just recognize it's a journey and to remain coachable and like be a sponge and like learn as much as you can and just have a positive attitude. And I think good things will happen if that's your mindset, like going in every day. But not all of us are going to like wake up and be a superstar overnight. Like there's a lot of work that goes into it, and just remaining coachable and humble and positive is the best thing you can do.
Absolutely. I love that advice. And sort of on that front, one of the other things I was interested in talking to you about was, your Under Armour commercial, where you talk about sort of like imposter syndrome. And I think you just alluded to that, in that, all of us feel that at some point to varying degrees, but literally I think every human has felt that. And so you mentioned just a little bit about how you sort of dealt with that. And in the commercial, you talk about watching film of your positive, plays and whatnot. But I think it's important for somebody to hear, a WNBA player saying, man, sometimes I struggle with self-confidence. It's not always like I walk out there and I'm just ready to drop 30, and so could you just talk a little bit about maybe your journey with that and sort of the mental side of the game? Because I'm super interested in that. Just love to hear that.
Yeah. So with the Under Armour commercial, like I was super lucky that, they had this new campaign coming out, like Under the Armor, and they were at the forefront of talking about like the mentality side of sports, because that's half the game. It's not just training your muscles and everything. It's like your mind is so important to your performance. And they reached out to me, and I was able to talk about like my experience with, just my mentality and mental health. And I shared with them a story from my freshman year of college. And I remember a month into school, my mom came down and visited for the weekend, and it was great. And I was like telling her how much I love school and I was killing it, whatever, everything a mom wants to hear.
Oh yeah.
And then like she was dropping me off at the gym for practice, and I just like couldn't get out of the car. I just like broke down into tears. I was like, everyone here is smarter than me. Everyone's better than me at basketball. Like, I don't know how I'm going to do it. Like, why did they recruit me? Like, this is so hard. Like, I just broke down, and I was like, I don't know if I can do it. And this was like October of like freshman year, but still I was like so overwhelmed. And she was like, they recruited you for a reason, like calm down, like it's going to be okay. Like my mom gives me the best advice. And so I don't even remember what she said, but she made me get out of the car and go to practice. And
Shout out to mom. Shout out to mom.
Literally the best. And, you know, after that, like I was able to kind of flip my mentality. I was able to, I mean, I still struggled a lot with my confidence throughout my entire career. I'm still working on it, but you know, that moment was really important to me, and realizing like I was able to get through that time and, you know, succeed and thrive at Princeton and have a great career. So I think anyone who's like dealing with that imposter syndrome, like not belonging somewhere, that you're not good enough, that it was an accident that you ended up there. I don't think that's true. I think everything happens for a reason, and you just have to find your place and find your confidence. And, you know, I think basketball really helped me find that for sure.
Yeah. And I think this is, first of all, thanks for sharing that. I mean, that's incredibly inspiring for real. And I think people who listen will feel the same. But it's important to hear, you know, young hoopers listening to that. That's great also. But anybody in any realm of life, right? For me, like I'm not alone. You're not alone in that. You know, I think it might have been January for me where my mom visited me, and for academics, I was like, Mom, like it was finals period, right? For first semester, I was like, Mom, like I can't do this. Like I might have been crying in the car. I don't even remember, but I was just down and out. And I think it speaks to the idea that like, I don't know how you feel about this, but in our culture, I feel like we want to avoid the struggle naturally. Like we want to sort of like get away from that. And it doesn't feel good to be anxious or like worried about if you're over your depth. But, and a lot of times it's cliche, but when you really internalize it, like struggling can really form you in a way that just being comfortable can't. So I feel like that's a little inspiration for anybody, whether it's academics or sports, who just feels a little out of their depth, to kind of go forward and see somebody like you succeed. And so my question would be, was it just like the mental attitude that, or your mom's support, or a host of factors that sort of helped you build that confidence? And did you do any sort of like meditation or visualization or anything to really work on that mental side of your game at all? It's okay if not, but
no, that's like a huge thing. Like even when I was in middle school, I remember my mom was like, before a game, she was like, I want you to close your eyes and like go through the whole game in your head, but everything's going to go well in your mind. So I'd win the tip. I was blocking people. I was making every shot. I was like running up and down the floor, getting every rebound. And that was kind of like a really like early practice of like positive visualization. And I didn't realize that was like such an important tool for athletes all over the world at every level. And so I've been doing that for a really long time, and I definitely see the positive effects of that. And then the big one, which I talked about in my Under Armour commercial, is just watching film that is positive. I think as athletes and as people, we tend to criticize ourselves a lot, and we focus on like where we can improve. Like, okay, here's where I'm falling short. I missed a shot. Like, why did that happen? Whatever. And that's all good. And I think we need to see our mistakes to improve, of course. But when that's all you're seeing, then you're forgetting like what you actually do well. And so I actually have like a highlight reel of my best moments, whatever, like I feel like I'm most confident playing the best, and I can watch those before games, and it gives me a huge confidence boost. And it's like a literal, like it actually happened. I trust it because it's real, it's film, and I know I can do it because I've done it before. So it's like your actual like real life highlight reel that you can see the positive visualization in real time, which has been super helpful for me.
I love the idea of making it real, right? Because I've even noticed this. I don't know if you have the same experience, but when I try to visualize, my brain kind of automatically might go to a negative, honestly, like even like sort of imagining it going wrong. And I'm like, dang, that's not great. It's doing that. It sort of takes like an override to really, you know, get me to the positive visualization without any film, but sort of adding that film is a great thing. And just going over your accomplishments and your resume every once in a while, right, is a nice thing. And then like you said, sort of when you got criticism from Coach Banghart or any of the coaches, like, were you able to just sort of apply, like switch over to the mindset of like, okay, now I'm going to learn from this? And it's sort of like a waffling back and forth between like building yourself up and then learning from that criticism, would you say?
Yeah.
Because you need both.
It's a fine line. Like, I think when I was younger, I hated film because I was like, oh, I'm about to miss, like, oh, I'm about to do something stupid. And you're just like sitting in your chair, like cringing. And as I've, played for more years and gotten more experience, like I get more comfortable like watching film where like I know I'm about to make the mistake because at least I recognize it, and my coach recognizes it, and it's something like I fix later in the game, or I know next game like I can make those changes. But yeah, I think it's not internalizing criticism. Like, obviously there's no one is going on having a perfect game. LeBron James makes a mistake every game. Like, you can't expect to do everything perfectly. But it's just making sure you remember, the good things you do out there, and the reason like you're on the team and you bring something, to the court.
For sure. And I love that. And sort of, the other element of this is you were performing so high on the court, so well on the court. Then you had this real academic challenge at Princeton, right? Like, we know Princeton ain't no joke, right? It's tough. So again, maybe useful for people who are thinking to go to a similar school, right? Could you just talk a little bit about your schedule there? What strategies you employ to sort of handle the academic rigor, because it's real there, as well as perform well on the court, and any challenges that were there, and like what you did to balance?
Yeah, it's funny because what you're signing up for when you decide to like play a Division I sport like at Princeton, but you never really know what it's going to be like until you get there and experience it. And it was definitely a challenge, like especially my first year. Like, I'm talking about being upset about basketball, but school was hard enough too. And I think the best lesson I learned was just time management. College, you have like a couple blocks of classes every day, but you have a lot of free time. And I like to like be social and make friends and go sit around in the dining halls for a few hours. And I did that for freshman year. I was like making all these friends, having a great time, and definitely prioritized that over school. I felt like I did that a lot freshman year. And then once I kind of realized like I could manage my time way better, spend more time in the library, like just blocking out time like for myself where I could like really focus. That's when I got the most work done. So I think, it's all a balance. Like, you don't want to just spend your college years like in the library and on the basketball court. Like, that's not what I wanted my 4 years to be like, but you obviously want to like do well in school, and focus on academics, because that's the main reason you're there. So I think the big thing was just time management and, learning that the hard way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was in the same boat as you, but not going through the rigor of the practicing. And you guys had to travel all the way down to Jadwin. So it's like all this commuting time. So respect to you. And I think it shows, right? Like, it wasn't easy, like we just talked about, but it is possible, right? To sort of cultivate your wellness as best as possible. None of us are the picture perfect wellness, but you're able to succeed on the court, in the classroom, and socially. It's possible, right? Takes some effort though.
For sure.
Great. And then I guess one of the last questions I had about Princeton was just getting that senior season cut short. And just 26-1, I think you guys were, and no NCAA tournament, right? If I'm not mistaken. What was that like? How do you swallow that? How do you process that, if you even have at all?
It was crazy because I remember when everything kind of went down, we ended our season, like our regular season, as the Ivy League champions, and we were preparing super hard to go in the Ivy League tournament, because even though we'd probably get an at-large bid because we were a top 25 team, we just wanted to make a point. So they canceled the Ivy League tournament first. And I remember we still knew we were going to be able to get the bye to the tournament, but our men's team, that meant that was the end of their season. So that was hard because our teams are close, and I have so many close friends on that team, and like that just was really heartbreaking to see them experience that first. And then so we had a little bit of hope for our own team, and then NCAA announced no fans, and then like the next day I think the NBA season canceled or like stopped short, then the NCAA tournament canceled. And that was just like so hard. I just remember me and Taylor, my co-captain, going to our coach's office, and they just were like crying when we got there. And we were like, oh no, it's over. It's just like, who predicts this? Like you can't. And, you work so hard all season to play in the NCAA tournament. And it's just hard to, we're also like realizing we're about to be in like a global pandemic,
right?
Like in quarantine, like there was so much happening. But I think the best thing we did was be together as a team and just kind of like talk through the end of the season and recognize like how much we had accomplished, and to actually just be like proud of what we did do, even though there's like that unfinished business, like you can't fully like accept it's over. Like we kind of had that closure as a team.
Yes.
And because we're 26-1, we're technically national champions because that was the same record as South Carolina.
There you go.
So we could end on that high note. But it was, it's heartbreaking, I think, for everyone, for every college athlete who had their season cut short. Even for this past year, like all my teammates didn't get to play, in this season. And it's just heartbreaking. But, we were able to stay on Zooms with each other and like support each other through the end of the school year. And you just make the most of it. So it's not easy, but, it happened.
Right. It happened.
Yeah.
Not easy. I feel like it's never going to go away. Pain's kind of never going to go away a little bit, right? It's always going to be there, and that's okay. And I think one of the things that you alluded to was something that, on the last pod, I was talking with a basketball player as well about, what's really important at the end of the day with sports. And it's sometimes very easy to lose sight of that, at least for myself. But it really is sort of like the people that you're meeting and like the relationships you're forming and the experiences you're having as a collective. So it sounds like you're able to get a little bit of that piece, just like being with your team and remembering that, at the end, 50 years, right? Like you'll be 26-1, and that was great, but also the relationships that you form. And again, it sounds corny, but like when you really let that sink in, I think that's what's most important about sports at the end of the day. I don't know.
I think it's definitely the bonds you create. Like you go through so much in sports, and like no one understands except the people who experienced it together. And I think it's just, it's like an unspoken bond. And for me, just being a senior, like I already went through senior night, and I'm like, I love my team, and I was so emotional. And I kind of went through that whole like roller coaster, like, okay, that was my last game in Jadwin. Like this is like kind of nearing the end. And so I was already like in that space where I was like, okay, like I feel like I have a lot to finish with this team, but I'm really proud of this season. And, once it was cut short, I think everyone was kind of experiencing those same emotions that like, and I think it was just the fact that it all happened so quickly made it just a little more difficult. But I completely agree with you. Like the things I remember most are not like, these specific games and the wins and the losses, but it's like the moments you spend with your teammates on the bus or like in the locker room, and like, going to lunch with your teammates, like even like the hard practices that like you just hated that day. Like I miss those things. And I think that's the great part about sports.
Absolutely. It's like, that's when I think about my conversations with all my teammates in the past, like that's what you talk about. And I remember being so fixated on like, and worried about like how I performed, like how many points did I have this game, that game, especially in high school. I remember like thinking that like people will remember that forever. And like, I really don't remember anything about that now. And it's important for people who might be in that now to hear somebody like you talk about that, of like, okay, I want to do the best I can, but let me focus on being a good teammate too, and a good, just support system for the people around you, because that's what you talk about, the jokes in the future and all that.
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
great. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I figured now moving into sort of the WNBA realm, first question about it before I dive into sort of like men's versus women's like pay inequality and all that stuff, because I've been like reading about that and I want to hear your perspective a lot.
Yeah.
First thing I want to know is just like, what would be one thing about, the life of a WNBA player? I know it's kind of crazy right now because it's all different, but like, what would be something that people just don't know about that lifestyle, and sort of giving them that inside look of what it's like?
So I haven't even had like a real like WNBA season because my first one was in the bubble. But I think something that I wish more people knew about professional female basketball players is that it's not just the WNBA season. Like this is year round for a lot of these women. And like I have a teammate here in Spain who's been playing WNBA overseas for like over 10 years. And like that is crazy to me, like basically without a break she's just been playing, and so many players do this, and it's because of the way WNBA players are paid, in the United States versus overseas. The contracts you can get playing for teams overseas are way higher than you can get in the United States, and so I think just I want to like shout out the fact that these women are like literally playing year round, to play the sport they love, which I think is just incredible.
And I think that's so important for people to hear. And I'm gonna call myself out, right? Because I even think of myself as a huge, proponent of women's basketball. Like I grew up watching my sister in particular play basketball. She played at a very high level, walked on D1. I went to all her practices and AAU tournaments, went to my sister's volleyball stuff, like very into women's sports. I try to watch as much as I could, but I didn't even know that, right? That like the reason why you're in Spain right now, right, is because you're playing on the European circuit basically right now. Because the WNBA season is so much shorter and the pay gap, right? So I think that's just important for people to hear. And even me, just to like check myself, be like, whoa, like I didn't even know that, right? So man, I guess like now jumping into that, I really just want to hear your perspective about it. And I've done some research on this, right, about like why this is occurring, right? This pay gap, and what is the pay gap, right? So for me, one of the biggest statistics is that 20% of the revenue in the WNBA is paid to salaries, and 50% of the revenue in the NBA is paid to salaries. And so I was learning, please feel free to jump in whenever you want, but I was just learning about like, what is going on there? Like the viewership is the same for the WNBA versus the MLS, for example. So Major League Soccer. But it just seems that the corporate sponsorship is so much lower for the WNBA. And is that because like corporate executives are mostly male? Just why is this investment not pouring in? But then is there cause for hope? Because the WNBA has been around only about 20 so years. And I think the NBA, when it was around for 20 years, like the revenue was about 20%. So maybe it can grow in the future. But I'm just throwing out stats and stuff I was learning about. But I'd love to kind of like just learn more from you and have our viewers kind of hear from your perspective.
Yeah. So the WNBA actually celebrated its 25th anniversary, I think, a few days ago. And I don't have the exact numbers, so I don't want to quote anything, but it's around, if not better, like what the NBA was within 25 years.
Excellent.
In terms of like viewership and like in certain realms of like whatever, it's doing well for how young it is as a league. And I think the big thing for me that I've thought about is just the chicken and egg problem with investment in marketing, and the idea that like people don't want to watch women's sports, but there's no investment in it. And then people say, well, why would we invest in it if like no one wants to watch it?
Absolutely.
And I think like female athletes are like a huge untapped marketing like area of marketing. Like I think the more that companies and groups can invest in women's sports, I think they're going to see tremendous growth down the road. But it has to happen now. I think there has to be an investment to see any, have anything come back. So that's kind of how I see it. Is I think, we continue to, try to tell stories of the individual players and try to market them, try to get people excited about the league. But I think there has to be just more investment in it for things to grow.
Yeah.
And that's kind of just how I've thought about it.
Yeah. And I love that. I love that, you're staying positive, because I can imagine it. I mean, maybe you're negative a lot of the time, or sometimes, like, and that would be understandable, because I don't know, for me, I just get upset, right, when I'm like reading, and I can imagine you do too, but like reading comments, right, on like Instagram posts that might be celebrating like a female athlete or a female sport, right? And I feel like people are so brazenly sort of like anti-female sports, like in these
Yeah.
Instagram comments, right? And I obviously there's a huge racism problem in America, and it's, as bad as ever maybe, but I feel like people aren't in the comments with the same type of, just brash outspokenness against women's sports, against racism, as they are, in women's sports. And I feel like that's brutal to see, but also, like you said, maybe there's some real hope here, because the numbers aren't so different from where the NBA was, that we can really, grow this sport and have people see that it's a beautiful game. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think, speaking to what you're saying about like online comments and stuff, I think that is like a huge challenge for female athletes. Is like, we all have a social media presence, and people feel so confident coming in your comments and your direct messages saying just like such sexist, like, or like harassing comments, like anything. And it's crazy to me how bold people can be. And it's obviously their issue if they feel the need to say something to me or one of my teammates. But it is amazing to me, like, just how outspoken people can be as in like for anti-women's sports. And I don't really see why growing that game hurts anyone. I think it just improves society. And I think the visibility of women's sports, I think women's basketball is played differently than men's basketball.
I was just
when you
say
watch
that.
it, there's like a different type of like teamwork aspect. I see the ball moves differently. And I think if you appreciate it for what it is, then people will love it. But I think people are really quick to treat it as like a second class citizen. It's like women's basketball, and then there's basketball, which is men's basketball. And I think that's why there's this conversation,
Yes. And I think what you touched on is so important, right? And for anybody who's listening, right, who might not be sold on women's sports, or maybe is even anti-women's sports, right? I think what Bella said is key, and trying to show you the positive aspect of this sport to draw you in, right? And I saw exactly what you were saying, saw a stat saying that 52% of all WNBA players fall above the average points per game tally for their league, WNBA, whereas 40% of all NBA players fall above that average, right? So that shows that there's much more focus on sort of like star power in the NBA, and there's much more of that team aspect. And here's the important in the WNBA. Here's the important thing, right? Like, everybody fell in love with the 2014 Spurs and like the 2016 Warriors because of that ball movement, right? And it's like people don't even know that it's there in the WNBA, and it's such a beautifully like refreshing game to watch. So I just wanted to highlight that based on exactly what you just said. It's a stat. It's there. You can look it up.
Yeah. No, I think it's really cool to watch like women's basketball. And my dad, who's played at, the highest level, like, he chooses to watch women's basketball now. I don't know if it's because of me or it's because he genuinely likes the way the game is played. But I think it's true. I think don't knock it till you try it. Like, I think people are quick to make comments and they haven't even like tried to watch a game. But yeah, I think there's an appreciation there that anyone could have if you just love the game of basketball.
Absolutely. Why not both, right? Like you said, doesn't detract to support women's sports. Why not both? And I think that's just a great message for people to hear. And I guess, this is an interesting question I saw on the internet. I feel like people might pay attention to your answer crazy because you're in the WNBA, but feel free to not comment on this. But I thought this was interesting. Thoughts on the idea that, we should lower the rim in women's basketball to increase like athleticism and not increase athleticism, increase athletic plays, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some famous WNBA players are really for this. Some think it's like awful. It's an awful idea. You don't have to
Yeah.
comment. I know it might get like super public if you comment on
No,
it,
I
but
can. I
yeah,
actually feel like I've thought about this a lot,
yeah.
and I think I don't think we should lower the rims. Like I can dunk on a 10-foot
Let's
hoop. And
go. Let's go.
there's plenty of players that can. And I don't think that's an issue. I don't know how many dunks happen in an NBA game, but it's not like an overwhelming amount that's the only reason people are watching is because people are dunking. But I mean, that's not the reason I watch. Like, I think there's other aspects of the game that are really cool. But one thing I was thinking about that I don't know if someone has talked about this before, but if we lower the women's rim by a foot, then imagine all the girls who go out to a public park and want to practice, and then it's 10 feet, and then they're at a disadvantage because they can't practice on those hoops. And then, there's already this issue, like say you go to, Lifetime Fitness and all the guys are like, oh, we have to lower the rim for this girl. I just see that as like an accessibility problem. And I don't think, it would make it any easier for women to train and play the game if we have to have like different hoops everywhere. So that's kind of my 2 cents about the rims.
I think that's a brilliant point. And firstly, going back to what we were just talking about, I think personally, my opinion, based off, the reading I've done, talking with you, is like, I'd rather just keep it, like you said, at the 10 foot, just so we don't create more of this divide between the two sports. I could see it going both ways, but like, let's just appreciate the women's game for what it is. It's different than the men's game. We don't need to try to equalize it in the hoop sense. I know the balls are a little bit lighter. I think the 3-point line is a little closer, but I don't like the accessibility problem is such a real thing, right? And you don't want that to be you got to overhaul like all the parks in the United States. Like, come on.
I
don't know
and
if that's
think
feasible.
There's already like a barrier of entry for women coming into basketball because like we've been talking about, I think like society like sees basketball as like men's basketball and women are the ones like intruding on this. And to then like lower the hoops and have another barrier of entry there, I think would cause like a bigger problem.
Love it. I love it. Thank you for your perspective there.
And
now as we're moving towards the end of it, I just kind of want to ask, about who you are outside of basketball, right? So I know, balling is basically a ball is life, right? As the bball never stops, as the shirts used to say. But I know you studied history at Princeton. Maybe you're not passionate about it. You don't have to be passionate about it, but would love to like ask you sort of what motivated that. And is there any kind of history that you're interested in from that perspective?
Yeah. So I didn't really know what I wanted to major in going into Princeton. I thought psychology, even though I'd never taken a psychology class before. And I took Psych 101 and it kicked my butt. I did not like it. Went the soc route for a little bit and thought maybe I'd do sociology. But I found that I loved all my history classes and I spent the most time like doing homework for them. And I loved the readings and all my best grades were in history. And I was like, this seems like a sign, like I actually enjoy this. And if I'm going to write, like an 80-page thesis, like maybe it should be about, a general subject that I enjoy. And so that's kind of how I landed on history. I've always liked it. Like I really like US history. And then Hamilton came out and I was like, I love US history even more. But yeah, that's kind of how I ended up doing that. I love like writing and, I'm a quick reader. I like reading too. So it just made sense for me. And speaking of Hamilton too, I just like love Broadway. That's like one of my favorite things. I grew up like seeing a lot of shows with my mom, who we haven't talked about, but she's not as athletic as my dad. And she's more on like the artsy side. And has always, pushed me to do things in the arts. And I think that's made me maybe a more well-rounded person, but I absolutely love Broadway. So that's one of my like secret side passions in my life.
I love it. I love
Yeah.
it. I think, this podcast for me is sort of, one of, if not the only sort of creative endeavor that I'm like doing at the moment. And it's just been so much pre-med, and I love medicine and all that. It's great, but there is something to be said about cultivating that side of your life. And honestly, I don't know if arts and sports are that disparate, right? I think you're both sort of creating and
Mhm.
entertaining, and in a way that's very different and very unique, but super cool to hear that. My question would be, what kind of books are you interested in? You said you like to read a little bit. Do you do any reading for fun? Any books? Are you nonfiction, fiction person?
Yeah.
What are you into?
So after school ended, I like went on a book hiatus. I was like, I cannot read another page of
Can't look at a
anything.
page. Yeah.
But recently, since I've been overseas, I definitely have more downtime. So I like to read like thrillers,
Yes.
like murder mystery stuff. I just like can read books in like 2 days. Like I get obsessed with like the
Mhm.
plots, and I just have to like read it really fast. So that's kind of my favorite genre. And I also try to read some like nonfiction to keep myself educated
Yeah.
on other things, but that's definitely what I enjoy the most.
I love that. Murder mysteries. I've only dipped my toe into like Agatha Christie, which is kind
Yeah,
of the mainstream,
I'm
right?
reading I'm reading one of hers now. It's called Five Little Pigs. I'm like
Okay.
halfway done with it, so I'll let you know if it's any good.
For sure. Please do. I read And Then There Were None, and then Murder on the Orient Express. Both great. I
Yeah.
like thrillers as well. I mean, I I joke with my friends and stuff like I feel like I'm a smart person, I hope. But like
I
with
think you are.
crime,
You went to Princeton.
who knows? They might have, messed up there. But like with these thrillers, I feel like it's hard for me to follow them sometimes, but I still love it.
Same,
I don't know if you ever
same.
get that experience where you're just like, I'm not quite sure where we're at right now, but this is awesome. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
yeah, that happens to me too.
okay, I'm not alone. Um, I'm not the only, hopefully, smart person who feels that way. Great. And then, any hobbies? I guess reading is a hobby, but anything else that you like to do? Anything that's kind of like brought you joy in the pandemic during this crazy
Yeah.
time at
This
all?
one's kind of funny. So my younger brother, he's in animation. He's at RIT, like studying animation.
Sick.
And he loves animation. Like generally, he talks about cartoons and video games, like favorite thing to talk about. And I was like, I brought up Animal Crossing because I was just curious what it was. And for Christmas, it was the sweetest thing. He got me a Nintendo Switch and Animal
Oh,
Crossing.
yes.
And I became obsessed with Animal Crossing for a solid like few months. I'll like go back and play it sometimes, but
Yeah.
that was like a really random hobby I never expected to pick up during the pandemic
Yeah.
that I weirdly spent a lot of time doing. So
Were you a gamer at all before that, or not at all?
not really. So I have two younger brothers, and they're both like major gamers. They
Right.
have the whole setup with the LED lights and the keyboard and everything. And I can't even keep up with them. So
Mhm.
I have not, and I'm so competitive that like I hate the fact that they can beat me every time we
Naturally.
play video games.
Naturally.
So I choose not to participate all the time. But yeah, I mean, Animal Crossing I'm pretty good at this
It,
point. So
it's so funny you say that. Like my sister's the same way, Hooper, and like she wasn't bad at video games, but she was like, I know you could beat me, so I don't want to play you.
yeah.
What was it like on this Animal Crossing front? I like my girlfriend was playing it too, and I was like,
Yeah.
what do you love so much about it? Like
I
you're just
don't
sort of
know.
building the town. Like what is it that you love? It's just like, I don't know, it
I
looks
don't
cool
know.
though.
I think it's like the creative part. Like you
Yes.
basically have an island that you have your little person that's you, and you run around and you clean up the island and you make it literally whatever you want. And like for a while you try to like get enough money and like resources to have a concert, and then once that happens you just have free reign to do whatever you want on this
Wow.
island. And so that, I spent a lot of hours just building houses and doing different things. I really don't know why it's addictive, but it is.
No, see, that's it. Sometimes you just gotta do things that have no end, that's like tangible and it's fun. That's video
Yeah,
games, you know what I mean? And
yeah.
I feel like so that's super dope. Um, Last question here, Bella, is like, and again, if you haven't thought about this, no worries. Have you
Okay.
thought of like Yeah, I know, because you said, right, you weren't sure you were going to go to the WNBA, you know what I mean, early on.
Mhm.
Have you thought about like what lies beyond a potential playing career at all? Any
Yeah.
inkling of what you would want to do?
Yeah. I randomly was talking to my mom a little bit about this today, actually, but I just know I love basketball, like
Yes.
obviously. And I feel like I am so passionate about like playing for a team, whether that's being on the court or making the team better, if that's on the business side. Like
Mm,
I'm really motivated by working towards a common goal with others. I
mhm.
think that's what really makes me tick. And so I really hope to stay within the basketball world. And like we were talking about, this pay gap and the gender inequality in
Yes.
sports, that is something I've grown to be so passionate about, especially because I'm kind of like living it now. And, you know, I hope maybe to be an advocate for Title IX one day, whether that's, you know, going to law school eventually and maybe like doing being a lawyer on that side of it, because
Yeah.
I have, you know, like some role models in my life who that's their career.
Right.
But I think I would like to make a difference in some way with gender equality in sports. And so I don't know what that's going to look like, but down the road, I hope, you know, that's something I can, you know, leave like an impact on the world with.
Man, you got me fired up. It's just, you got me inspired. You know, I was inspired before coming on, just hearing that, sort of tying everything we talked about together. I know you can do it. You know, whatever you set your mind to, you got it. And just thank you, Bella. It's like literally almost
Thank
midnight
you.
where you're at. This has been an absolute joy. So just thank you for your time and just insights that you shared. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Oh my God, I just knocked on the
Time to
No,
go to
it was
bed.
great talking to you. And I feel like it's so easy to talk to you and you can literally talk about any topic in the world. So
Mm,
I really appreciate your time too and inviting me on the podcast.
thank you, Bella. To the listeners, good night, good afternoon. We appreciate it. All right. Bye-bye.